Welcome to Incredible Idaho. I'm Jack Hemingway. Tonight's show begins with a trip on Idaho's fish taxi. All through our high mountain country, beautiful alpine lakes sparkle like glistening diamonds scattered among the granite peaks. To quietly fish one of these gems is a remarkable experience, not soon forgotten. A study in solitude for Idaho anglers. But you know, until 1920, many of these lakes were totally barren, totally bereft of fish. 10,000 years ago, the powerful glaciers of the Ice Age groaned and scraped, shifting, building, and tearing down until finally, spent, they retreated. Left behind was a sculptured terrain of craggy peaks and magnificent cirques, shielding at least 2,000 mountain lakes in Idaho's backcountry. But these same sheltering mountains became barriers, draining the lakes by sheer vertical streams and waterfalls, creating an impossible route for even the hardiest native fish to access. The mountain lakes were destined to remain empty. But in the 1920s, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game and the U.S. Forest Service began a fish taxi. Mule trains loaded with 10-gallon milk cans transported tiny trout fry into these alpine lakes. And with a few changes, this same fish taxi service continues today.
Whoop. Went up. Whoop.
For Fish and Game Manager Stacy Gebhardt, there's no better mode of transportation than a reliable mule.
Come on, Skeeter.
Skeeter follows in the footsteps of 70 years of mule trains, transporting fish over steep, rocky trails through spectacular country.
Now, one thing about mules, they're a lot more sure-footed than some horses I've used. I feel a lot better on a mule than a horse.
Tucked in Skeeter's saddlebags are 1,000 trout, measuring less than 2 inches long. Their destination is Hidden Lake, about 3 miles up the trail.
This is probably the best duty you can get in Fish and Game is packing fish, for me anyway. Depending on the size, I've carried up to 3,000 to 4,000 fish if they're really tiny. And normally, we've got enough fish in one bag to stock one lake. We can haul 6 bags to a mule and stock 6 lakes on one trip if we have a group of lakes that are together and that need planning.
The lake lives up to its name. It's tucked into a basin hidden by thick pine forest, a perfect spot to spend a summer afternoon fishing for trout.
Well, looks like they enjoyed their ride, the mule. Need to set them in the lake now, let them acclimate to the lake temperature for about 20 minutes.
These little guys are West Slope cutthroat trout, a native of Idaho.
Mix a little lake water with it here. Ease them into it, their new home.
2 summers from now, they'll be large enough to catch. In 3 or 4 summers, they'll be big beauties. But the cutthroat won't reproduce because Hidden Lake, like most of these mountain lakes, has no inlet and trout need moving stream water to spawn. For this to remain an angler's paradise, old Skeeter the mule must return every 2 years carrying his precious cargo. The journey actually begins here, in the raceways of the McCall hatchery. In the early 60s, Stacy Gebhardt began experimenting with new methods of transporting trout. He replaced the cumbersome 10-gallon milk cans with plastic bags. This cut the weight from 110 pounds to 6 and upped the survival rate to 100%. A pound of fish, that's about 1,000 tiny trout, are loaded with 3 quarts of water into a plastic bag that's inflated with pure oxygen. Some will journey gently by the old-fashioned mule train, but most will arrive in their new homes with a bit more of a splash. Stocking fish from the air isn't new either, but the efficiency has increased dramatically with the advent of lighter plastic bags and modern aircraft.
You just turn on end and go straight into the lake, and sitting in the back seat, you're basically hanging by the seat belt. when he pulls up out of it and you pull the plug of the fish, it just kind of sucks you down the seat and fly up over the next ridge, and your stomach kind of comes on up to your everything else. It feels great. Best ride I've ever had. Better than a roller coaster.
The fish, too, get quite a ride, followed by a 500-foot drop into a mountain lake. But it appears to be working. Hatchery Superintendent Rob Hill testifies to the quality fishing experience to be found in Idaho's alpine lakes.
Yeah, I've gotten up to quite a few in the McCall vicinity, and it's probably the best fishing available. You don't run into very many other people, and you get a good walk out of the deal and some real good scenery.
Cute little guys.
Melanie and Paul Spieler are spending their second wedding anniversary doing just that, walking and enjoying the scenery. But it's not camping gear they're packing on their backs.
Each year at this time, we recruit volunteers from our volunteer base who like to backpack these fish into the various lakes where they're not accessible by car or it's not feasible to stock them by air.
This is a beautiful lake.
20 to 25 lakes are stocked each year by volunteers like Paul and Melanie.
They are on the wrong end. There we go.
Planting fish is just one undertaking of the volunteer program at Fish and Game. The projects vary, but the motivation remains the same: the conservation of Idaho's outdoors and wildlife.
When Bob told us we're coming in to plant fish and then come back on the same trip and pick up the garbage, that made it more appealing than it was in the first place. My wife and I just love Idaho, and it is a crying shame to see people leave the state a mess. It's really disappointing.
I really like doing things to help ensure that everything's going to stay wild and that the environment's going to be okay and that people can come up and do fishing in places like this and enjoy their stays in the outdoors. And we're hoping to come back in 2 years on our 4th anniversary and come catch some of the fish we just released.
The quiet tranquility of fishing a pristine mountain lake is just one of the many experiences available to Idaho anglers. All over Idaho, beautiful rivers, lakes, and streams are just begging to be fished. It has all the romance of a late 19th century Impressionist painting. Dappled sunlight, soft reflections, peace and serenity. A couple of fishermen, a pretty woman, on a boat slowly drifting through a lazy summer day. In southeast Idaho, the South Fork of the Snake River spills out of Palisades Reservoir to form a beautiful canyon. It boasts not only the romantic scenery of a Monet masterpiece, but some of the best cutthroat fishing around.
Oh, he's a beauty.
He is.
The idea of releasing a fish like this cutthroat has turned a fading resource into a river known nationwide for its premier trout fishing. Boy, you can see the red on its throat. In the early 80s, the river's regular anglers noted that the number of fish and their size were deteriorating. A study conducted by the Idaho Department of Fish and Game confirmed that the trout population was showing signs of overfishing. Regulations were eventually changed to a 2-trout limit, and the release of all trout, rainbow, brown, hybrids, and cutthroat, between 8 and 16 inches. In just a few years, the river has turned back around.
And try to get the fly out of his mouth while he's still in the net, then I can concentrate on releasing him.
The cutthroat population has increased somewhere around 3 or 4 times, but the number of larger fish over 16 inches, has increased even more dramatically. As I recall, it was only like 1% of the fish were over 16 inches, and now it's 10%. So, not only has the number of fish increased, but the percent of larger fish has increased sharply.
Cutthroats are a bit less crafty than their cousins, the brown and rainbow trout.
You look at you never do with a brown trout or even a rainbow. You'd never come back if they'd made a mistake.
Mistakes like this make the cutthroat trout a little more easy to catch. A plus for the beginning angler.
Okay, pick it up.
Good cast. Again, there you go.
This is 10-year-old Whitney Trent's first day with a fly rod, and she's already caught and released a nice cutthroat. She may also have caught a touch of the terminal fly fishing fever that affects her dad, and collected some lasting memories along the way.
We'll be able to come here for many years and stand in the same spots and say, we caught our first fish here.
The fever to fish is something that can be difficult to put into words. What is it that draws so many folks to Idaho's lakes, rivers, and streams?
Whether it's returning to nature and trying to be a hunter-gatherer, or it's just fun to fool a fish, or you don't know how big they're going to be or when they're going to hit. But, something a lot of people like to do.
It was really fun. It was really fun. It's fun to see him come up and take the fly and just go. It was really fun.
The traditional picture of a fly fisherman is someone clad in waders, standing midstream, bracing himself against the flow of the river. But in the last 10 years, drift boats have begun catching on. They provide access to rivers that are too swift or deep to wade, and open up another world to fly fishermen.
With the drift boat, you can work the shorelines, you can stop where you want to and fish, and it's a nice way to fish. It's quiet, peaceful, and major disturbance of the mergansers taking off or watching the eagles, and it's a nice way to fish.
The trick to fly fishing is to know what the fish are hitting. Usually at this time of the year, early July, a stonefly hatch begins on the South Fork that lasts about a month.
That really carries a lot of the trout population in this river. They're a big juicy bug that has a lot of nutritive value.
Research studies show that the trout get close to half their annual calories from the stonefly hatch. But today, cool weather has interrupted the cycle.
That's a pretty typical fish, isn't it?
That's about the standard size.
Yeah.
13, 14 inches.
Today, the trout seem to be interested in another delicacy.
It's a pseudocleon. It's a real small mayfly with and instead of having a little lower wing, it's at sort of a spur wing like most mayflies. It's just got this single upper wing, two tails, and in this case, olive body. One of his wings is stuck to my finger.
Tiny flies tied to gossamer tippets. Those are the words of Charles Kuralt. Someone once asked Kuralt who was the greatest person he ever met on the road. His choice was a retired judge and author named John Folker, a man with a fever to fish and a gift for words. Folker wrote, "I fish because I love to, because I love the environs where trout are found, which are invariably beautiful. Because trout do not lie or cheat, or cannot be bought or bribed, or impressed by power, but respond only to quietude and humility and endless patience. Because I suspect that men are going along this way for the last time, and I, for one, don't want to waste the trip. And finally, not because I regard fishing as being so terribly important, but I suspect that so many of the other concerns of men are equally unimportant and not nearly so much fun. Amen." My first trip to the Pacimmeroy Valley was in the fall of 1941. My father, Ernest Hemingway, brought me and my brothers out here on a big antelope hunt. I seem to remember spending most of my time just hunting trout. But we weren't the first to hunt the Pacimmeroy Valley. Long before man had fashioned his first primitive weapons, the shadow of another hunter, the golden eagle, floated silently across the valley floor. The Pacimmeroy is a long, arid plain that crouches between two mountain ranges, the Lemhis to the east and the Lost River Range to the west. It is the hunting grounds of the golden eagle. They soar down from the cliffs to search for jackrabbits, leaving the story of the hunt behind in the snow. Tracks of the prey and the signature of the golden eagle, the imprint of a wingtip shadowing the layer of white.
And this is what we look for. We look for signs that eagles have been there. So we look for eagle tracks.
Wildlife artist and raptor biologist Erica Craig has turned the tables on the golden eagle. He has become the hunted.
We will trap in areas where there are dense concentrations of jackrabbits because the eagles will be hanging out there.
Erica and her husband, biologist Tim Craig, are trapping birds like this immature male to check for signs of lead poisoning in free-ranging golden eagles.
Years ago, we noticed that there were quite a few birds that were being turned into Fish and Game, the rehab programs, that were exhibiting symptoms of lead poisoning. And so it kind of alerted us.
The question is whether the high lead levels run in the entire population of the area. Each trapped bird is marked with a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band and a brightly colored leg marker so Erica and Tim can identify it from a distance.
We are the only people in the country with this color of leg band. And so, you know, if someone were to report a green leg-banded eagle, it would be from our study.
Next, measurements are taken. This helps to determine if it's a male or female. In most raptor species, the female is larger than the male.
A female would be more like 66, 67. The last measurement is a head measurement, so we'll have to take the hood off for that. This bird will struggle a little bit, but not too much.
He's named for the bright, distinctive feathers on the back of his head. From his burnished crown to his amazing talons, the golden eagle is built to hunt.
And this is where the real power comes from. The helix, the hind toe with this really large talon is they're the grappling and the killing instruments for the golden eagle. When they catch a jackrabbit, they actually embed those talons into the animal and kill it with them.
The most critical test is the blood sample. This will be sent to a laboratory to determine if this free-ranging golden eagle has elevated lead levels in his system. Preliminary results are indicating that there is a problem in the population, prompting Erica and Tim to plan the second part of the study, a research project to determine where the lead is coming from. By early summer, the team is seeking out the rugged cliffs where the golden eagle builds her nest.
We're going to attempt to rappel into it. It doesn't look like it's overhung too much. And we'll climb to the top of the nest and above it and attempt to tie off and then rappel down into the nest.
The idea is to take a blood sample from the nestlings to see if they too have lead in their systems.
That is to try to determine if these young eagles are getting lead from the prey that's being brought into them, from their food. Obviously, a nestling eagle has never been anywhere else except in the nest, and the prey is going to have come from someplace fairly close to that nest. This bag has everything in it that you need for blood samples and for banding and for measuring.
It is critical to test the nestlings when they are about to fledge or leave the nest. This allows the longest possible time for them to accumulate lead in their systems.
You don't like to see that.
Golden eagles don't exhibit the same behavior that some of the other raptors do, in that they're not real aggressive at the nest site. And so you don't generally see a golden eagle screaming and diving on a raptor biologist going into a nest.
The incredible dimensions of the nest become apparent as Tim drops alongside. He stands quietly so the nestlings aren't alarmed. But this young female decides the time has come for her maiden flight.
We'll go catch that bird and process it on the ground.
Tim leaves the nest site immediately to prevent the other nestling from testing her wings. It's not often that a bird fledges in this situation, but it's always a risk. The young female has landed safely below the cliff and is found within minutes by the biologists.
This bird is probably between 70 and 75 days of age.
The young eagle is banded and measured. She's already the size of an adult bird, but it will be 4 years before she loses the white mottled feathering and becomes sexually mature.
And you can see I got the vein exposed pretty well there.
The blood sample will be sent to a lab and analyzed for lead contamination, and the young female will be sent back up the cliff. She's left on a ledge below the nest where the adults will be certain to find her. The golden eagle is on top of the food chain, much like human beings. What happens to them may become a problem for us.
They're a barometer of environmental health, so they're something that set off warning signals. They're kind of like the canary in the mine shaft, basically.
We've been hearing a lot about endangered species lately in the news, but what does it really mean, in words and pictures, for a species to be in danger of extinction? As we close our show tonight, we'll take you to Stanley Basin, where once thousands and thousands of sockeye salmon returned from the sea. Where today, we're fortunate if even one returns. This first arrival is a treasured sight.
As a representative of a species that's almost gone, it's very special. We're glad to see him back, and hopefully some others that have started the trip will also make it.
I think these fish are especially neat salmon just because they come so far inland. It's just really amazing that the fish can make it this far.
We always wait till it's almost too late to do anything, and hopefully this time we can save it before they are all gone completely. It would be nice to be able to see the fish still in this area, you know, for my children and their children.